Hi, my name is Adam Kemp, and today I will be briefly explaining what history is and the types that modern historians practice. I will also very briefly go over three topics that I would like to explore as a historian. I will then outline how they were part of the three previously mentioned branches of history and how these three selected branches can illuminate the topics that I have chosen. Before all of that, though, you might want to know what history is. Merriam-Webster's dictionary describes history as a chronological record of significant events such as those affecting a nation or institution, and often including an explanation of their causes. Now, there are two ways of looking at these records. You can look at large-scale trends. These often encompass multiple societies, nations, or eras. This is macro history. Or you can look at how these trends affect individuals and communities. You can even look at how small-scale events affect solely these individuals or communities. This is microhistory. There are seven main branches of history, and each of them use sources from both macro and micro points of view. Those seven branches of history are intellectual history. This is the history of ideas and how they came about, how they are applied, how they're changed, and how they're used, and as well as the consequences of these ideas. This is the first type of historical study, and we cannot pinpoint the creation of intellectual history. But we can focus on how it affected the creation of the profession. The earliest incarnations of intellectual history in the modern era were Voltaire and Jacob Burckhardt. The second type of history is political. The first major political history work is from a German historian by the name of Leopold von Ranke in the mid-19th century. Political history often examines ideas, movements, governments, as well as parties, politicians, and citizens. It can be focused on anybody from the elites to the little guy and anything in between. This is one of the most popular professional identifiers for historians, right behind social history. However, most political historians are in the US and focus on US political history. This is followed by Britain, Germany, and France. So, as you can imagine, there's a whole bunch of dead white guys that did everything they could to change the world. Um, the third type of history is social history. This is separated into two categories. The first is old social history, which is mainly focused on economics and Marxist theory. One of the major parts of old social history is historical materialism, which is the idea that people in society follow a certain set of laws, and to Marx, these laws were mainly economic in nature. How the little guy is kept down, so the big guy can make his profit, so on and so forth. Then there is New Social History. This is led by the New Left historians and is focused on people's history, social structures, and social processes. New Social History gave birth to a fairly important trend called historical revisionism, which Robert C. Williams describes on page 211 of his book, The Historian's Toolbox, as research and writing that contradict the conventional wisdom about a historical topic. So this is going and re-looking at something that has already been discussed and seeing how the information looks in a modern light. The fourth type of history is cultural history. This rose out of the intellectual history in the 1800s in no small part to the work of Jacob Burckhardt. Cultural history looks at how society and culture changes over time, as well as how certain aspects of culture affect lives and how lives affect certain aspects of culture. And as an aside, it should be noted that cultural history covers pieces of our lives that we refer to as culture as well. This includes art, music, literature. So you don't have to think of it as just something in a book. An old record can be just as much a part of cultural history as a dusty book on a shelf. The fifth type of history is gender history. This type of history examines how gender roles are seen as social and cultural constructs. It often focuses on how masculine and feminine individuals have different experiences in life and how these individuals are impacted by traditional and modern power structures. Some examples of this would be historical works on the suffragette movement. The sixth type of history that we will be looking at is post-colonial history. Post-colonial history has two major issues that historians of it look at. The first is the lasting legacy of imperial colonialism on social systems, political systems, as well as cultural and power systems. If you would like an example of this, look at how India has been altered by Great Britain. Franz Fanon was one of the leading proponents of this type of history. Many of the ideologies and theories used today come from his psychological work done on formerly colonized men and women. Now, the final type of history that I would like to briefly go over is world and global history. Now, world history is normally comparative. It examines how events affect two or more areas of the world. However, it can be Eurocentric. As I stated earlier with political history, a lot of historians are in America, Great Britain, and Germany. So it follows that world and global history is looked at from that point of view. And the next is global history. Global history examines events, issues, trends, and how they affect humanity. Now, I don't need to say too much about this because this is the type of history that's taught everywhere from middle school on up. So it should be fairly familiar to anyone that I'd be discussing it with. Lastly, I will be discussing 3 topics that I would like to explore as a historian and the 3 types of history that can help me do this. Now, these topics are a little specific, so hopefully you can work with me here. I would like to look at the effect of the Versailles Treaty on European stability in post-World War I Europe, the lasting effects of the Mongolian invasion on the intellectual revolution of the Middle East, and how environmental stewardship changed from the industrial era to the present day. Now, as you can see, these are all disparate elements and really don't look interconnected at all on the surface. But by using social, intellectual, and cultural histories and the lens that these types of histories give us to look through events, I can use these to look at each topic. Let's start with the Versailles Treaty and its effect on European stability in post-World War I Europe. Now, in order for me to understand how post-World War I Europe was affected, I would have to look at the social climate of the time, any philosophers that were prevalent at the time, individuals like Marx, which were thumping around, and cultural and societal norms and attitudes that were prevalent. So those 3 types of history could really help me look at that issue. The next, the lasting effects of the Mongolian invasion on the intellectual revolution of the Middle East. Now, most people know that the Middle East had a huge renaissance going on at this time. It was there were massive advancements in math, in culture, medicine, and some guys on horseback decided to come through and just wipe it all out. Now, if I look at the intellectual histories of the philosophers and the religious texts, that can give me an idea of how the Middle East was at the time. I can also look at poetry and literature that was written at the time. And I can look at the social climate, how people talked to one another, how they addressed issues, how the courts were set up. All of these things can come together and help show me where the Middle East changed after this invasion, like the things that they had before that they didn't have afterwards. The last item that I'd like to look at real quick is how environmental stewardship changed from the industrial era to present day. Now, in order to do this, I have to look at environmental history, which can be covered under cultural history. I would like to look at intellectual history. This can show me the attitudes of businessmen at the time. There was a huge push for manifest destiny at the time in America, so this can give me that perspective. And then social history. This is how the individuals reacted to manifest destiny, because it wasn't like one big monstrous corporation. No, this was individuals that did these things. And this was a cumulative process that changed how stewardship was viewed. So, in conclusion, today we've talked about what history is, the types that are practiced, topics I would like to practice, and the types of history that will help me do so. I hope this was at least a little bit informative, and I hope that all of you have a great day. Thank you. Goodbye.